So, ID Vincent. Good afternoon, everyone. Or good evening. Can you all hear me? Welcome to this afternoon CPD. I'm going to nominate one of us to moderate this session. And I'm thinking that RD Eric Anku should do that. Eric, can you hear me? Hello, Eric. Can anyone hear me? You can hear me, give me an alert or a message in the chat.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so thank you for the feedback, Jacinta. Eric, great. So for reasons beyond my control, I've had to step in for the secretary who will join us in 15 minutes because of an equally important meeting that's ongoing. But I'm also not in a position to moderate the meeting currently. So I'm seeking for a volunteer to do just that. I see that Dr. Isaac Agomafle is already on the call. Ike, are you there? MTN. Okay. So I'm actually hoping that somebody will volunteer to moderate this session. Or Barbara, are you available to do that? Barbara or Eric, I'm just volunteering you at this point. Hello. It's 5 after 4. I'm hoping to get a volunteer to moderate a session. Anybody? Sophie? Okay, Auntie Felicia, thank you for for volunteering. Kindly take over. We want to wait for another 4 minutes or so and start at 4:10. We hope that some more people will join by then. Dr. Gomafle, if you are here, just let us hear your voice so that we can start in 4 minutes.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
Good. Thank you. So I don't know if you could make me a co-host so that I could.
I thought I already did that. Okay, let me try that.
Yes. Thank you.
So Isaac, I'm sending you a private message. Kindly check it. So, Isaac.
Yes, okay. So I shared that with Miss Sanam already. Do you want me to send it to you?
Yes, please do.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you want me to
Yes,
put it in the chat to you, or you want me to email
yes,
it?
in the chat.
Okay.
Isaac, thank you very much. So Felicia, I've sent you a private message as well.
Okay.
Okay. So I think in the next minute you can take over and then we can start the recording. All right. Thank you very much for volunteering.
Before I start the recording, so just any housekeeping announcements, like I know it's going to be 2 hours, but I hope I don't have to spend all the 2 hours.
Certainly not. Once
Okay.
the conversation is over, we can end from there. We are hoping to have
Okay.
more of the interaction sections thereafter. So
Yes, so maybe I'll do 1 hour and then we can do this thing after that.
excellent.
I'm not going far.
Excellent. Okay, so colleagues, thank you for joining us for this evening's CPD. I'm going to officially start the recording now, and our sister, gifted nutritionist Felicia Tansu, would moderate the session for us. Thank you so much, Felicia, for the leadership. God bless you.
Thank you.
It was recording all the while.
Okay. So, good evening to us all, seniors, colleagues, and friends. Welcome to our CPD training for today. We have had to go on a small break after quite a long series of sessions earlier this year. So today, as we are all aware, we are having a CPD training on the topic making the food composition of table of West Africa a useful tool for practice. And we have a very noble professor in our midst who is going to help us understand how we can make this possible. But before we begin, I would like a volunteer to give us an opening prayer, please. You know, Ghanaians is part of us, that we start everything by inviting the presence of God. So a quick prayer from any one of us, please. Otherwise, I would nominate someone. Portia. Oh, okay. So I have someone. Okay, Rauf, please. Go ahead. Rauf, can you help? Can you hear me? You own up to pray. Yes, please. Go ahead.
Okay, let's pray. In the name of Allah, the compassionate, the merciful, master of the day of judgment, you alone we worship, you alone we guide for help. Guide us to the right path, the path of those whom you bestow favors, not those who have invited your wrath, not those who have gone astray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much for that quick one. We are grateful. So like I mentioned, today we are having a CPD on the topic making the food composition table a useful tool, making the food composition table of West Africa a useful tool for practice. And we have in our midst a very seasoned personality. He is an assistant professor in the Department of Nutrition, University of Rhode Island. Before starting at Rhode Island in 2023, he was a lecturer at the University of Health and Allied Sciences here in Ghana. And then he currently teaches general nutrition and nutrition through the life cycle at the University Rhode Island. He received his PhD in human nutrition and statistics from the Oahu University, State University, USA. He has a postdoctoral training at the University of California, Davis in the International Nutrition. He's working on a research project in Ghana and Ethiopia. Our professor, Dr. Agbe Mefia, please forgive me if I don't get the name right. He is currently a co-investigator on a double salt fortification trial with iodine and folic acid in Ethiopia. His centers around dietary analysis and design. He is also a principal investigator. What is happening? Sorry, I'm having, oh God. Okay, sorry about that. My network is troubling me. He's also a principal investigator of the Sustainable Dietary Innovations Lab at URI. His research lab aims to improve our understanding of precision nutrition using different sustainable dietary innovation models. Specifically, his lab uses computer simulations to formulate sustainable diets and test its impact on various nutritional outcomes in humans. Doctor has received several awards, including the Presidential Research Excellence Award from the Ohio State University and the D.R. Griffiths Research Excellence Award from the Nutritional Sciences Council. He was also named a finalist in the 2020 American Society for Nutrition Emerging Leaders competition. He is a reviewer for a few internationally recognized peer-reviewed journals. And I must say that we are privileged this evening to have Dr. Isaac with us. He has authored over 20 publications in internationally recognized peer-reviewed journals. And this evening, Ghana Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics is more than honored to have as our speaker, Dr. Isaac Agbe Mefia, to help us understand how we can make the food composition table of West Africa a useful tool for practice. I know we would count this session worthwhile. Doc, if you are with us, please, can you take over? Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much for your introduction, and I hope you can all hear me loud and clear. So I'm presenting on the, thank you very much for the introduction, and then I will just proceed to speak on the topic. So the food-based dietary guidelines and then the food composition table are something that I'll really be talking about. So first of all, I want us to understand why the call for the food composition table as a useful tool for practice. So we need to understand why Gand is doing this call at this urgent time. Then I'll give a bit of a background on the food composition table in general, specifically with the West African one. And then I'll focus on how to use the food composition table as a useful tool for clinical practice, and then also a useful tool for research. And then we'll look at the future directions of the food composition table. So I'm going to skip this section. This is actually my journey, and then I'm sure that the introduction has really taken care of that. So I'm going to leave this section and then move to the next slide. So why the call for the food composition table as a useful tool for practice? This is because malnutrition prevalence are still very high, and therefore we need to really do something about it because food is a main driver of the malnutrition prevalence. And we can see from the 2022 Global Nutrition Report that malnutrition rates are declining globally, but then somebody will tell you that if you take Africa out of the equation, then they are likely to meet the target. But then you can see that most of the forces or the drivers of the high burden is mostly in Africa and then in Asia. So most children with malnutrition live in Africa and Asia, and you can see the statistics for yourself. And this is because of we are not using the food-based, the food composition table as expected. So though stunting rate has declined steadily, fast progress is still needed to be able to, for us to reach the 2030 target for the Sustainable Development Goals. The rates of stunting and wasting reduction are too slow. And if this current progress continues, then we'll not be able to achieve the the Sustainable Development Goals. So nearly half of all deaths in children under 5 are attributed to various forms of malnutrition. And this is why we need to really prioritize the use of the food composition tables in helping us to do our dietary advice, and then also in our clinical practice and research as well. Again, when we take the burden of malnutrition, this is looking at body mass index, which is a measure of overweight, and we can see, and so you can see Ghana slightly in our picture here. As we can see here, this is Ghana, and we can see that Ghana is really, it's also not doing too well in terms of overweight and obesity. So we are still driving a lot of the overweight and obesity that is currently happening globally. And this is why we need to really prioritize a food composition table for use in practice. So in terms of the burden of malnutrition, if nothing is done about these situations, then 1/3 of all women of reproductive age globally are at a risk of that. And then globally, 40% of women of reproductive age are anemic as well. And then if nothing is done about this, then we need about $10.8 billion annually between 2022 and 2030 just to be able to meet these nutrition targets, which is reducing stunting, childhood wasting, breastfeeding, and anemia. And this is where the food composition table can really help us to be able to prioritize precision nutrition in order for us to be able to help reduce the burden of malnutrition. So these are some global pictures. What about the case of Ghana? So if you look at trends in childhood mortality again in Ghana from 1988 to 2017, we can see that there are quite some kind of decreases, but if you take from 2014 to 2017, it is kind of like staggering. So there is no progress that is being made at all. Or even if there is, it is quite less significant. Again, if you look at malnutrition situations in the country, we can see some downward trends, but then these trends are not things that are really sustainable. Therefore, we need to look at a concrete approach to be able to deal with that. But then again, we can see that though stunting, overweight, and underweight, stunting, wasting, and underweight are reducing, we also see that overweight is also climbing up, and then we need to really think about what we can do about that. There are several forms of anemia also in the country, and we can see that from 2008 to 2014, anemia rates has been hovering around 66%. And that is why the Girls in Iron and Folic Acid Supplementation Trial was started. The GIFT program was started in order to reduce the burden of anemia. And again, we look at women of reproductive age and then children. So anemia is really a problem. So how has the progress been to date? So from this Global Nutrition Report for 2021, we can see that very few countries are on course in actually meeting the maternal, infant, and young child nutrition targets for 2025. And this is actually a marker or something like a prerequisite for you to be able to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals in 2030. And coupled with the low progress, we were also hit by COVID-19, which has actually also exacerbated or has eroded some of the gains that we have actually chopped in the past few years in relation to the progress that we have made in trying to combat malnutrition. So you can see that childhood stunting, only 53% of countries are known to be on course. And then in terms of childhood overweight also, most countries are also really battling with that as well. Breastfeeding rates are very low. And then we can see that there is an increase in high blood pressure as well. So men, 23% of countries, we are just on course with that. And then for women, we can see 45%, 45 countries are on course to be able to achieve this global target for non-communicable diseases. And this is where we really need to prioritize the food-based dietary guidelines as well as the food composition table. Adult obesity, we can see that no country is on course in actually meeting this dietary recommendation. And this is something that should be of worry for us. And therefore, today we'll learn about how to prioritize or use the food composition tables to be able to deal with that. And then in terms of diabetes as well, only 8 countries are on course to actually meet this recommendation.
Dr. Agomafle.
Yes.
Yes, sorry about that. Is it possible to reshare the slides in the presentation mode? It's currently in the presenter mode. We can see your next slide. Can you?
Oh.
And your lesson notes, if it's possible to just share the most present, yes.
Is this better?
We are not yet. It hasn't showed yet. It's still back at the presenter mode. I'm not sure how you can. Yes, try that.
Is this okay?
No, it's not. So we can all see the next slide that you are intending to show.
Okay, so maybe.
So somebody says try selecting the display settings at the top.
Yeah, it's because I'm using 2 screens, so maybe I'll just change it to 1 screen.
Okay. So that we only get to see the slide you want us to see. Sorry for the um, interjection. But Felicia, please check your chat.
Okay. My chat.
Have they started?
There's nothing in my chat.
This is perfect. Dr. Agbawafle. Thank you for fixing this. Over to you.
Is it okay now?
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay,
So now we can
all right.
see the slides better.
Okay, good. So are the slides able to move or they are not moving?
Try moving and let's see. So it's currently on progress to date.
Yeah. All right, so sorry for the technical issue. So I'm using two screens, so it's making life difficult a bit, but I think, yes, I think it should be okay now. Yeah, okay. Yeah, please, can you all see my screen?
Yes, please.
Yes,
Okay,
please.
good.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your patience.
Yes, please. I can see it.
Good. Thank you. So as I was mentioning, progress to date has been very slow. And then because of that, and this has also been compounded by COVID-19 coming in. And then if the current trends continue, we can see that especially for the non-communicable diseases, then we are not going to really have any, none of the countries will really be able to make the 2030 target. So the current diets do not explicitly address poor diets and their choices or the quality as well. So that is why we need to really make sure that we are focusing on using the food composition table in doing this. So we can see, especially in relation to anemia, that only one country is on course to achieving the 2025 target. And this will translate into the fact that will not be around, will not be able to meet the sustainable development goals. So all countries around the world, it is from the Global Nutrition Report, too few countries are on course to meet the nutrition targets. And this is a cause for worry for us. And the main drivers of these causes of malnutrition is the diet. And therefore, we want to see that most people are not consuming the right diets that they need to consume. And this is really affecting the cause of our progress. So we can see the deviations from the recommended maximum intake. So globally, whole grains, we can see that 61% of us are below the intake for whole grains. For fruits and vegetables, we can see the same percentage, 60%. Vegetables also about 40% of the countries globally. And then in Africa, about 54% are taking below the minimum recommended intake. And this is where we have to use the food composition table to be able to do proper dietary advice. So this tells us that no region is meeting the current recommendation for healthy diets, and poor diets are really the drivers of the global nutrition issues. And we need to see how we can marry the food composition table with malnutrition issues and then solve them as well. So the food composition table forms a basis for us to be able to do our dietary adequacy, to assess how adequate our diet is, whether it is of good quality or not. And then mostly the goal is to provide us with information to be able to estimate our dietary intake as well. And then we can also use this to assess our food security situation as a country. So trying to maximize the food composition table will help us to be able to control the malnutrition burden that is currently available. And the remaining presentation is going to focus on how we can do that. But before we look at that, we want to focus on some of the history behind the food composition table. So this has been in existence since 1949, and it has moved along the ranks till now. There are currently newer versions, although Ghana's food composition table is like 1983, so that was about 5 years after I was born, and it's still what we are using. But then luckily, the West African food composition table is more up to date, and that is where we can derive some of the foods that we don't currently have in the Ghana food composition table form. So what really goes into the food composition table? So mostly in compiling the food composition table, they try to use analytical data. So they take food samples and then they take them to the lab, and then they run the approximate analysis of the foods. And then they also look at the vitamin and mineral analysis. And then sometimes they do fatty acid profile or the amino acid profile. So all these are various nutrients that we can find in the food composition table. And mostly they look at the foods are defined under various categories based on the variety as well as the breed and then the species level. And then also they build a biography of references, the country, the region, the season, and there are a lot of specifications as well. And then the scientific names of the foods are also included. And then we have what are known as tag names or the food codes. And these are very important because they try to link these to each specific food in the food composition table. And this West Africa food composition table is normally a compilation of all the various foods that are available in West Africa. And this is how the data is being compiled. And another important thing to note in the food composition table is the various nutrients have units. So you want to really pay attention to these units when you are actually looking at the nutrient contents in the food composition table. We also have something called retention factor, which is very important because the food composition table could contain both raw foods and then cooked foods. So the retention factor takes into consideration the cooking method. And therefore, if the food is fried compared to it being boiled or compared to it being roasted, there are different retention factors for that. And these retention factors are mostly done through experiments in the lab. And currently, most of the borrowing from the food for the retention factors or the values for the retention factors are mostly based on data from studies that have been done in developed countries. So there are certain gaps in the food composition table of West Africa and in all food composition tables as well. One of them is the fact that the food is not comprehensive enough. The list of the foods in the table is not comprehensive enough, which means that there is still the need for funding to be able to update the food composition table. So we need to really be aware of that. Data quality is also an issue, and then there are still some laboratory analysis that need to be done because new methods have come up, and some of the nutrients in the foods that have been put in the food composition table are based on maybe very old methods. So there is a need for newer analysis to be done, but all relies on funding issues. Then we talk about the retention factors already, which is really related to the fact that mostly these values are imported from developed countries. So how well does that sit into the way we cook our foods locally? All these are things that we need to look at. Then differences in methods of analysis, as I've mentioned already, and in some calculations or some formulas that are used to be able to convert some of the nutrients into other forms as well. And then there are also issues about the quality of the data that is coming in, how we are compiling them. But irrespective of all these challenges, we know that it provides us a basis or gives us an idea of where we can start from. It's better to have something than not to have anything at all, right? So the Food and Agriculture Organization, as one of its congresses, really emphasized the need for us to really continue working on the food composition table to be able to really prioritize and utilize this the more. And I know one of the former directors, Professor Nalate, and then also the one really in charge of the food composition table, Ruth has also resigned, but then the food composition table is active and coming alive very strongly. And now they have a study guide that has been developed by FAO. So for our faculty or lecturers and then our students as well, you can easily Google this and then you'll find these documents. So if you really want something to study about the food composition table, this is a useful document for you. So I remember I was teaching the students about this and I had to go and dig up some information here to help them to understand the course. So this is a good material for you. It gives you a lot of questions, practical issues that you can be able to handle. So I may not be able to cover everything in this slides. So this is your go-to document, and I encourage everybody who is interested in the food composition table to look at it. So what are some of the uses of the food composition table? So mostly the food composition table can help us in food labeling, can also help us to do some nutrient intake analysis, and that is what most people try to use it for. Very few people have used it for diet formulation or as well as research, and I'm going to talk a bit about that. And then these can also translate into consumer information. So the consumers may not be able to use the West Africa food composition table, but we as practitioners need to be able to do the food labeling, do the nutrient intake, and then we can be able to use that to formulate information to educate the general public. Then we have the food-based dietary guidelines, and I'm going to talk about the food-based dietary guidelines because Ghana has a food-based dietary guideline now, and I'll tell you how we use the food composition table to be able to model the food-based dietary guideline that you see now. We're a very few team that did that, so just working behind the scenes. And then we can use the food-based dietary guidelines again to be able to inform research. Then the composition table can also help us to determine nutrient requirements for an individual. And all of these can translate into food policies. And I know some groups are working, Professor La and his team are working on meals for NCD. So all these are useful information that we can get from the food composition table to be able to translate into that. So one of the first uses I want to talk about is recipe calculation. So let's look at recipe calculation. How do we calculate recipes? It's in 10 steps. So I'll talk about the first 5 now and continue the rest. So these steps are important because normally you want to design a recipe. So as a dietitian in the hospital, you want to formulate a recipe for maybe a diabetic patient, you want to formulate a recipe for maybe a pregnant woman or somebody who has burns and all that. This is something you have to really set up yourself. So we'll look at how to do that. So the first thing you want to do about recipes, and again, in terms of clinical practice, so for example, a patient comes to you and tells you that they eat maybe which food is not common. Maybe a food that you have not heard about before, and it's not in the composition table. You want to be able to calculate you do a recipe calculation to actually determine how much calories are actually coming from this food. And that is what most of the time as practitioners we fail to do. So we just give a generic advice. One size does not fit all. So we need to really up our game, try and give a more precise advice. So one way by which we can do recipe calculation for some food that is not available in the composition table. The first is that we want to look at the ingredients list. So first you generate an ingredient list whereby you input the recipes, the ingredients in the recipe. You can create a simple Excel and then input the recipes there. Then you input the weight of the recipe. So for example, if it is maybe, I'll give you an example. So if it is rice, you want to put the raw ingredients of the rice in there. Then you now put the weight of the ingredients that were used to do that, do the food cooking or the cooking of the food. Then we now look at the total weight of the raw ingredients. We sum all the raw ingredients together so that we can now determine the raw weight of the food. That was the raw ingredients in the weight of the raw ingredients. Then we now also determine the weight of the raw of the cooked food as well. So normally the weight of the cooked food is normally done by looking at the raw weight times a yield factor. So the yield factor is mostly looking at the amount that that was put into the dish, and then the amount that came over that was left after you have cooked it. So for example, if you put maybe a certain amount of food inside, when you finish cooking it, there's going to be some losses. So you want to calculate the yield after the cooking has happened. Then now you use the food composition table to input the ingredients from the recipe, or yes, from the recipe. So mostly the nutrients in the food composition table are per 100 grams. So after you have done that input of the nutrient content of the various ingredients per 100 grams, then you now calculate the nutrient content of the cooked food using the raw weight over the cooked food, multiplying it by the nutrient content of that particular ingredient. Then after that, you apply the retention factors, which is mostly gotten from Eurofield, and my friend, Dr. Yvonne, yeah, she helped me to look up the Eurofield table. So thank you, Yvonne. And then after that, you now look at the calculation of the nutrient content of the food using the retention factor, which is mostly what you did in step 6. And now you multiply that by the retention factor. So the nutrient content of that particular ingredient times the raw weight of that ingredient over the cooked weight, then you multiply that by the retention factor. And then you round the final numbers to 1 decimal place for micronutrients, and then 3 significant figures for micronutrients. And then that will help you to get the total nutrients in that recipe that the person has cooked. And then as a way of also calculating the energy content, then use the 4492 rule. So 4 calories per 1 gram of carbs, and then 4 calories per 1 gram of protein, and then 9 calories per 1 gram of fat, and then 2 calories per 1 gram of dietary fiber. So you use that, and that can help you to be able to estimate the total energy content of the food, in addition to the nutrients that you have found. So just a practical example. So for instance, I don't know if this is going to work. So for instance, I have this, the first step here is to take up the first step is to make a list of the ingredients. So I'm preparing maybe like pancake. So this is a potato pancake, so which is something that is not usually people will do. So it's something new, potato pancake. You may not find that in the food composition table. And this is what your client has been eating for a long time, and you really want to understand, could that be a driver of some kind of form of malnutrition in the person or something? So you want to really calculate that to be able to estimate the nutrient intake. So you calculate, you make a list of the foods, the ingredients. Then the second step is to fill in the amount of the ingredients in the recipe. And then the third step is to determine the total weight of the input ingredients. Then you now determine the cook weight. And then based on the cook weight, you now collect the information on the nutrient content of the food per 100 gram of edible portion. So this is something that is really important. You want to use the edible portion because not all the parts are being consumed. For example, we have egg. We don't consume the egg with the shell. So you want to make sure that it's just the edible portion. Then after that, you determine the weight change based on the cooking. And then after that, you now calculate the nutrient content, and then you apply the formulas. So this is something you can easily set up in your own Excel, and then you will be able to calculate the nutrient content based on what the person, the recipe calculation that the person has done. So if you find this very difficult for you, don't worry. There are different apps that can really help you to also be able to calculate the nutrient content of some recipes as well of foods. So we have the Isha food processor, and this was the first time I was introduced to it when I was doing my national service as a teaching assistant in University of Ghana. My professor, then Professor Steiner, bought the software, and I have to learn it from the scratch. So I learned it the hard way, but it was really worth it. And that I used it for a lot of other projects with the Professor Aite, and then Dr. Dida from the School of Public Health, and then some people at Kolebu as well. Then we also have the Nutrition Pro, which is also a commercial software that you can use. And then we have the OptiFoods, which is being developed by the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And this is also one of the tools that we use in our optimization for the food-based dietary guideline. So there are some tools available. The unfortunate thing is that you have to buy them. So if you don't have money like me, then you want to learn the hard way by going your Excel. So let's go back to our Excel again. So we can use these food composition tables to calculate our own nutrient intake. And that is something that I'm going to show you how to prioritize that or be able to do that. And myself and Dr. Yvonne Go, we have been working on this. We are working on a study in Ethiopia and then in India. So we are really building our own food composition table. And this is important as a practitioner. You want to build your own food composition table because maybe the district where you are, there are certain foods that are common there. So you want to make sure that you have information about those specific foods. You want to have that in your table. So for example, you have a column here for your food code, and then the description, then the local name, and then you now bring the nutrients per 100 gram of edible portion. So I will take you through a little bit on how to calculate your own or construct your own food composition table. So the first thing you want to do is that you want to first have a first column, which is your food code. So you want to have a food code. So this is your food code here. You are making use of your food code in the first column of your Excel table. Then you now do the food names in their local language. And then the column C can be a description of the foods in English. And then now you go to column D in the food composition table, and your Excel you are creating, you want to bring the food groups as well. Then the column E to Z, you list all the nutrients of interest to you. So for example, you are in diabetes management, you are interested in certain nutrients that you want to optimize, or you want to really make sure that your clients are getting enough of that. So you make your own nutrient list. So if it is iron you want to focus on, you make sure that iron is in your Excel. If it is protein, you want to make sure that they are there. And then the last column you want to include is the source of the composition table. The reason why I'm saying source is because sometimes you may need to borrow foods from and then nutrients from other food composition table. So that is something that you really want to think about, because we don't have everything in the West Africa food composition table. So this is something you can build yourself. So once you have done your own Excel, you want to do some quality checks. And my friend Yvonne is really she's really very keen on this, trying to let us know that this is what you have to do. So first of all, you want to know that if you are doing the checks, are the foods that are there, are they single foods or ingredients? You want to be sure about that. Some can be cooked foods, some can be raw foods. So you need to really be sure about that. If some foods are missing, how do you find them? You want to borrow them from other food composition tables. And this is something that you can really think about. Or you can also borrow them from the literature as well. So you need to see where you are getting your missing information from. And that is why the last column in the FCT table, the Excel you are developing, is very important. You need to know the source, so that anytime you can go back and check the source as well. Then the nutrients in the composition table are also important. For example, you may have maybe banku, or maybe like apple, or maybe like banana, and then there may be some nutrients that may be missing in those foods. So you can also borrow nutrients. So that is something you want to look at. So if you look at the current West Africa now, maybe it has only a few set of nutrients. It doesn't have a lot of nutrients. So you may be interested in a particular nutrient, maybe like some antioxidants, such as maybe beta-carotene or zeaxanthin, or maybe another type of antioxidant, like maybe a vitamin C level or something of another nutrient. And then you don't have that particular thing in your food list, in the food or the ingredient of interest. You want to make sure that you are borrowing that. There are also differences in the composition table. Some of these nutrients have either a zero value or a missing value. Zero means that the food does not contain that nutrient. But if it's a missing value, it tells you that that particular, there is no data for that particular nutrient or for that food. So these are things you want to pay attention to when you are compiling your own food composition table. And then when you borrow something, you don't copy and paste. So I know we want to copy and paste. and now with ChatGPT and all of that, we just take whatever they do for us and then we don't preview it. But it's very important when you are copying and bringing to your own Excel for the food composition table, you want to adjust after borrowing. What are some of the adjustments that can be done? You have to adjust based on the moisture of the food or the ingredients in your Excel, and then you also adjust for the moisture content from the food that is coming from that particular food composition table you have borrowed it. So for example, if I'm interested in iron, so the iron content of that food times the 100 minus the moisture content from my food that I'm looking at in Ghana, and then divided by 100 minus the moisture content from the food composition table that I'm borrowing from. For example, if I'm borrowing from Ethiopia, or if I'm borrowing from maybe Nigeria, then I get that there. Then the raw foods as well, whether the food is raw or cooked. Sometimes we need to convert from raw foods to cooked food. So we also need to look at the nutrient content of the raw food. We multiply it by the nutrient retention factor, and then we also multiply it by the yield factor. And this will help us to convert the food from raw food to cooked food. So this is very important. And you want to make sure that you check the quality of your own food composition table that you are developing, because you are pulling in data from all sources. So now, after you have designed your own food composition table in Excel, how do you do again? Now, let me go back to the dietitians. So we have something known as the diabetes exchange system. So in that exchange system, your food composition table that you have built is a good one for you to practice with. What are the foods that the person can substitute for? So for example, so you want to increase or maybe look at glycemic index, you want to promote low glycemic index foods or high glycemic index food for any particular reason for any patient. You need to look at carbs that are coming from each of these foods that you have compiled in your Excel FCT. And that is important so that they can be able to do substitutions. Exchange system can happen. So for example, you want to look at maybe, you want to recommend for them maybe banana instead of a plantain. So you are doing that kind of exchange. You want to be sure about that. And the only way by which you can do that is using your FCT. So if you don't build your own FCT, you will just be talking and giving generic advice. And the era of nutrition now is more about precision nutrition. So you want to make sure that it's not a one-size-fits-all campaign. It has to be tailored towards the needs of the individual. So after you have built your FCT, one way by which you can use is to use it for an exchange system, doing the carbohydrate counting. It can help you to be able to do that. And then as a dietitian, you are giving a more focused advice. It will also help you to use it in the exchange system. You can substitute foods from other food groups to be able to meet the same nutrient needs for that particular individual. So this is something that our dietitians will really need to prioritize and get their own Excel FCT working for them. Now let's come to the population level. What did we do with the food-based dietary guidelines? So in the food-based dietary guidelines, we had to develop or we have to do diet modeling for the food-based dietary guidelines. And I was contacted by Professor Aite at that time. That was last year, yes, 2022. And then it got me a bit busy. So I had a help from one of my graduate students as well, Richard. And then later on, we had another PhD student who is now for UDS, Foster also helping us with the analysis as well. So we started looking at how we can use the food composition table to model the food-based dietary guidelines for Ghana. And it was indeed a lot of work, but we were put to the challenge and then we were able to do it. So mostly what we did in the food-based dietary guidelines modeling is to have weekly meetings with the multi-sectorial technical task team, which is being headed by Professor Aite and then co-directed by Ms. Paulina Adi from MOFA. Yes, so they did a lot of situational analysis, and then we got some information from them on various data that we need to input into the modeling that we are going to do. And then we're trying to develop an Excel to be able to do all this, but then luckily we got in touch with FAO, and then they have a diet solver. And that made our step very easy, because my colleague Foster, who was going to help us, he was using OptiFoods for his PhD. So we're relying on that knowledge. And then we're trying to build our own Excel and doing everything from the scratch, which was really time consuming. But thankfully to God, we were able to get some help from FAO. And that really sped up the work that we're doing, because there was always pressure from the food-based dietary guidelines technical team for us to get this done in a quick fashion. So just to walk you a bit through the diet solver, what does it do? So mostly it's an optimization algorithm looking at using linear programming. So you give it some constraints or you give it some input, and then you allow the computer to like optimize, find a best solution for you. So first is that it has to have a food composition table. So we have to generate our own food composition table. That is why I talk about your own Excel FCT is really very like the go-to. You are in a district, you are working, you need to have your own Excel FCT that you are using to advise people. You want to tell them which kind of foods to use and all of that. Then once you have built your food composition, then you do a food selection based on commonly consumed foods that are available in the population. And we build also the food composition using available evidence. And I'm sure some of you last year, I was emailing you about data for so many things that you were collecting. Mostly, we don't have a lot of diet data because it's quite difficult to collect and everything. Then we now categorize the foods into various food groups. That is the step 3. So we now decide, okay, which of the food groups do we want to model? So we have to work with a technical team to be able to decide these are the food groups we want. And then we'll build constraints around the food groups. So for example, how much calories should come from this particular food group and all of that. And that is what the technical working group, based on the literature review that they did, they were able to guide us with that. And that helped us to be able to use that in our formulation. Then we set our constraints, then we do our optimization. So the optimization is simple. After we have put everything inside, we just let the computer decide for us what are the feasible solutions. If the computer brings out something that we don't really like, we change the constraints, and then we reiterate the process again until we come with a perfect solution. So basically, that is how it's happened. So then we now look at the visualization. So we have spoken a lot about this already. So we looked at the recommendation and put all the foods inside. Then we now look at the getting information from the West Africa Food Composition Table, as well as the 10 to 20 Ghana project. So my colleague Foster, he was working on the 10 to 20 Ghana project, and they had collected some information on that. And I think Gloria Folson also at Noguchi, Dr. Folson, I think she's also done some work on diet as well. So we got some data from their labs as well. And then that helped us to be able to do that. And then I think we also picked data on school children from one of our colleagues' work, Dr. Usu. And then also I did some work with women of reproductive age in Accra. We got some data from there to be able to look at the common foods that Ghanaians are eating. And that is really important. Then with the help of the technical team, we decided on these 7 food groups. So that is really what informed our analysis. And then based on these 7 food groups, we also now have to attach weights to the foods. So these weights were estimated based on all these sources of dietary information that we have collected. So if you are looking at fats, we want to make sure that which of the foods are being consumed highest in Ghana that are high in fat, we are putting those foods as first. So we give those foods higher weights. And then those food groups, the fat and oil food groups, those foods that are less consumed, we give them low weight. And every weight in each food category must sum up to 100%. So that is how we did the modeling. So we have to do a lot of assumptions based on the diet data, and then we now decide what we do. Then after that, we now work with the technical team again to determine how much should come from carbohydrates, protein, and fat. So, and then we set a minimum target and then a maximum target. So all this, we have to put these parameters into the Excel and then do that. Then we also determine the micronutrient goals of the diet modeling that we're doing. So we assume iron should meet 20 microgram per day, and then also zinc as well. And these were all based on recommendations from the technical working team. So yeah. So we did a couple of trials, and this was what we came up with. So this is very important. So based on the trials and then the modeling we did, we see that we're able to meet about 44% of total staples. Fruit and vegetables was meeting about 50% of the recommended based on the parameters that we put inside. So this is how we determine that. And then you could see that if you remember some of the numbers, you could see that this is really trying to optimize a little bit based on what we had put into the programming. So that is something that really came out very strong. And then we look at their contribution in terms of calories again, and it was very similar. So all these are graphs that we generated based on the Excel solver. Then we now translated these into the amounts per food group. So animal source food, this is how much serving you need in a day to be able to meet your RDA, to be able to eat well based on the food-based dietary guidelines, and then that translated into the number of serving sizes. Again, we use the Excel solver to be able to model all this. So as we were doing this, we were hard pressed with time. The other thing we were supposed to do was to look at cost, because we modeled the diet without adding cost to it. And we're having a hard time getting cost data from MOFA. And then, so what I did is that after this training, after doing the diet, I tried to look at what can I do in Hohoi. So what we started doing was to try and measure the diets that are where people were consuming in Hohoi, and then see whether if we can determine the cost and affordability of these diets. And measuring the economic and physical access to healthy diet is very, very important, because this will help us to explain whether if people are able to adhere to the food-based dietary guidelines or not, or even to using foods from the food composition table. So all these are important things that we can look at. So we try to generate a food basket based on what people are consuming, and then we're able to do that. And then we now look at the costs, how much each of these foods is costing. So my students, Doreen and then Ernestina, they were collecting information on how much people were spending on any of these foods. So then what we did is that we need to look at the least expensive combination of foods that we can actually use to promote health. And this is important in practice, because you are telling your client that they should go and take a certain X amount of food, but then you don't know how much the cost is. All that can influence their ability to take the food or not. So basically, this was what we're looking at. We're modeling how much the least cost diet is going to be. So just a bit about the modeling. So for example, if a diet, 1 gram of maybe 1 dozen of egg is about 156 Ghana cedis. I don't know the current cost, but I divide that by per kilogram of a dozen of egg, which you can also get from the food composition table that we have discussed. Then you now do you now convert it into, from a dozen egg to now a kilogram of egg, because mostly you want to calculate the cost based on kilogram. Then that will give you your price calculation per kilogram. And then you also need to look at the price calculation per edible portion. And remember, you get this data again from the food composition table. So this is how we have been using the food composition table over the years. Then we now calculate the price per calorie. That will help us to determine the energy cost as well. So basically, then that will help us to determine the cost per day to meet the recommended dietary guidelines that is being proposed by the food-based dietary guideline. So this is just some calculation on that. I'll skip that because that is similar to what I've already said in the previous slide. So just see how the cost is being done. And then we realized that vegetables are like the highest drivers of the food cost in the Hohoi municipality. So about almost 20 Ghana cedi is being spent a day on vegetables. And then this is surprising, even discretionary choices, which is like things that are not really like, people just take them for like, I mean, they are not really what you want them people to take. It's also driving about, it's about half of what people are spending on vegetables. So that is really significant as well. So these are what are the driving the food costs in Hohoi as well. Then again, with one of my students also, we did a healthy star rating. And this is also, again, using the food composition table. We try to use the food composition table to do a healthy star rating. And I'm sure that if you remember the energy stars on the fridge, right? We're trying to just model the same thing using the food composition table. And people also have used, there's a lot of, healthy star ratings. Some use the traffic light system and all of that. So just a few steps to go through how to do that. So first of all, you determine the product, whether the product is eligible for rating. Then you now use the ingredients in the product, and then based on the food groups and then the nutrient content to actually determine how healthy the food is. And then you now use that to calculate the healthy star rating based on their base points that you actually develop based on the model. I know this is quite like technical a bit, but I just wanted to see how practical we can use the food composition table. Then you now do your healthy star rating, and then you now calculate that. And then based on your healthy star rating and then the ingredients you have developed, you can design a fats panel. So check what we got in Hohoi. So this is Kiki's Court, and I'm sure those who know Hohoi or some restaurants in Hohoi, let's look at jollof fried rice and see the ingredients that are in there. And then we see the healthy star rating that we got there. So we got a 1.5 star rating. We're able to design a nutritional fats panel for the jollof fried rice. And then this is something that they can easily paste on their packages when people come to make an order or buy like a pack of jollof fried rice, right? And this will help an individual to know how many calories they are consuming. You can see the calories there, 1,359 calories. This is significant. We need to monitor our diet so that we actually know what people are consuming. Then you can be able to advise them very well. And again, we see fried rice on the other side, which is like 0.5 star rating. So this is how practical we have been able to use the FCT to be able to do all this in Huawei. Hoping that we can be able to scale this up nationally. Again, once you have built your local FCT, you can also use it for product formulation. So if you're a dietitian, you want to formulate product for a diabetic patient or a hypertensive patient, you need to create your own FCT. After that, you decide a target group. Then you now compare, you now input the target group, the RDA for the target group. And then based on the RDA, you now decide which ingredients in your FCT can actually help optimize or meet the RDA of the target group. Then you use those specific ingredients to estimate the nutrient content of the product. And then after that, you compare back to the RDA to see whether if they are meeting the recommendation or not. And then you keep doing the process over and over until you get a product that is meeting the RDA that you want. And remember that you cannot meet all the RDA, so you have to set a target. Are you meeting 20%, 30% of the RDA? That is something that you really want to focus on. And based on that, Prof. Zotto and then Prof. Amuna have really been helpful in this area, and then they are the pioneers of the food multi-mix concept. And these are different products that we have been able to develop from just using the food composition table. So this is very significant. And this again includes, or they are healthier choices because we just did not crack our brains and then just did it. We did it based on science. So this makes sure that anyone who is eating these foods knows exactly what they are consuming. And this is where we want to take the food composition table to. Of course, you can also do your own lab analysis to be able to ascertain this content. But then using the food composition table to be able to prioritize these things or build them up is very, very important. So that is where we are now. So based on all these we have learned, is there a future for the food composition table? Of course there is, right? So Dr. Forson and some group in IFPRI, and then I know there's another study going on, they are calling it the Nagging for Good. So they have developed an app called Franny. Franny, yeah, I'm getting the name right. So food something something is based on artificial intelligence, which is using the Franny system, like the app, to be able to estimate dietary intake for these people in Ghana, and then they are doing that in some other developing countries as well. So that is really important. Another innovation that is coming in the FCT era is called the Periodic Table of Food Initiatives. And then I got used to this or started working a little bit on this when I got to Ethiopia. And then Professor Reginald Annan at the KNUST. So if you don't know, KNUST is one of the centers of food excellence of centers for the food composition table. So we are now branding the food composition table, making it into a periodic table. And this is a big deal, because if you look at the deficiencies in the gaps in the composition table, you can see some nutrients are missing and other things are not there. This periodic table is going beyond just taking the fats of the food. If it's looking at fat, it's breaking down the fat into saturated fat, trans fat. If it's looking at trans fat, it's looking at the different types, looking at the saturated fat, it's looking at the N3, the N2s, all the different types. If it's analyzing for amino acid profile, it is profiling all of them. So it's like a big data set. And that is what they are using. So they call it the food omics. So they are using a lot of high technology to be able to like create a very comprehensive food composition table. So that is how the future of the food composition table is going. And then what is my future research in the area of food composition table? So as part of my job here at the University of Rhode Island, I'm looking at developing the Sustainable Dietary Innovations Lab, which I call the CD Lab, just to resonate with where I'm coming from in Ghana. So what we are doing is that we are using computer simulations and artificial intelligence to model the diets of individuals, taking into consideration their recommended dietary allowance, as well as the foods from the periodic table of food initiatives. We'll use that database, we'll merge the two together, and that will help us to be able to formulate sustainable diets. Then we'll be able to now determine the cost of these sustainable diets, and then we'll now measure the impact of these sustainable diets on nutritional outcomes. If we say the diet should deliver 20 microgram of iron, when the person consumes it, are they really delivering that? So that is something you want to measure. And then you also want to measure the acceptability and sensory attributes of these particular items that as well. And then currently I have Fred, who is on the left-hand side in the lab. And then I also have Amanda as one of my students now in the lab. We are looking for more funding, so hopefully in future we can get more students into the lab. So now I would like to conclude by looking at my Nutri-Tree diagram. So my Nutri-Tree diagram is all the people who have really helped me in my life as coming up as a young scientist. So I'm very grateful for Professor Nalate, because I didn't get to medical school and I was really down. And then I really wanted to do something else, but then she gave me an opportunity to read biochemistry and nutrition, which was a really difficult combination, but in our time it was started and we were one of the first people to really do that. So I'm really grateful to her for that. Professor Muna and then Professor Francis Zonto, who have really been like mentors for me whilst in UHAS, and then working with them continuously on the food multi-mix concept. And then in terms of my academic ladder, Professor Steiner-Asiedu, she has really challenged me a lot, and then Professor Salia, and then so they supervised me for my master's and my first degree, and then for my PhD, Professor Manju Reddy from Iowa State University. So this is how my nutrition tree is looking like. So I hope you can also develop your own nutrition tree. Then lastly, I'd like to thank UHAS, who has brought me this far, because I have learned a lot from UHAS. I have very great commitment to UHAS. So we are still partnering with UHAS to be able to do a lot of other things. And to my family and friends, I know sometimes I can be like, I can get lost and then not like mind anybody because there is too much pressure, but I know you have been very supportive. So thank you very much for all your support. And to my students and collaborators, it's been wonderful working with you. And I hope that we'll continue our collaborations. The collaborators are many, so I can't mention all of them. And my students too are many, both future and then past students as well. So on this note, I would like to thank you very much for your time. And then I hope that we can have some discussion sessions. Thank you.
Wow, wow. Wow, Doctor, thank you so very much for such an elaborate and insightful presentation. I mean, this it brings me joy knowing that there is so much bigger things for and achieve in our individual places of work, regardless of the location you find yourself. Now, we do not have excuse to say, oh, we don't have the resources. There is enough resources available for us to be able to practice and make our practice felt by the communities and the people we serve. So at this point, if you have any question, if you have any issue you want clarity on, and then you mute and then ask the question or make the submission. Also, you can drop your questions in the chat box. Just that I have a little challenge with my internet stability. So if you don't get to hear me very well, then it's probably due to that. And if I do happen to drop off, please, Benis, I know you're on the call, then you will take over, or Alice, you will take over for me. Thank you. So please, the floor is open for questions now. Any question, please?
I have a question.
Okay, please do. Go ahead.
It's more of like clarification. I wanted to know, so it means that based on the data that has been gathered and like concerning the cost per food and the nutrients that we are going to find in each food item, we should be able to use this information to like budget for a month. So based on the data, we should know how much you would need to spend each day to have, let's say, 2 balanced meals a day for 30 days. Then you can draw a budget from that. Am I right?
So I'll take a few questions and then I'll respond to all of them if that's okay.
Yes, that's fine. Please, any other question? Let me see if there's anybody on the chat. So, okay, so somebody is asking, please, when will we get the soft copy of the food composition table for professional practice? Then someone is asking, why developing own FCT? Can't the WA FCT be used straightforward? That's a question. Why do we have to develop our own FCT at our levels? Okay, for now, these are the only two on the charts. Okay, so Doc, please, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so I think the cost per food is really interesting. And then thank you, Fred, for that question. So ideally, I'm supposed to be working with MOFA on a project on that, but the data has not been forthcoming from them because they have been very busy with other projects. So I'll follow up with them again. And ideally, what we plan to do with that project is to try and then do quarterly reports or even half yearly reports on cost of foods in Ghana. So that we'll be able to tell consumers these are the cheap sources of food that you want to go to. So if you look at the diagram that I presented, looking at the cost of the food, so we had even within the vegetable food group, you can see which foods in the vegetable food groups are really driving the cost of the food. So based on the different vegetables that people are consuming, we'll be able to tell which vegetables are more expensive compared to other vegetables. So definitely once we come up with this information, with the current economic difficulties that are happening, you'll be able to prioritize and know that, okay, based on my budget, I will need to go for this kind of vegetable if I want to eat this and that kind of thing. So that is really something that you can really use for practice. So I'm hoping that I can get in touch with MOFA again, and then we can try and then work that project out. So that is something in the pipeline, and then hopefully one of my students, Ernestina, and then Doreen, and then Irene, they worked on the diet modeling, which I showed them. So we'll be able to get in touch with Mofa and then try to do that as well. So then the question on email, the soft copy of the FCT. Yeah, so I think that, yeah, we'll circulate the link to that. I think it's very easy document. Once you even Google West Africa food composition table, you should be able to get that. Yeah, but I think it's something that I can share with the leadership of Gand, and then they can put on your various platforms so that you can have access to that. So that's not a big deal. And then why develop our own FCT? Why can't we just use the West Africa food composition table straightforward? Well, so it's good because the West Africa food composition table is very big. You may not need all of those foods, right? So you want to customize your own. And customizing your own means that the district you are working, the hospital you are working, you see clients, there are common foods that they will be eating. So this is where you want to build your own database. And that is where it's important, because remember that even it's not all the foods that are available in the FCT for the West Africa. You need to even borrow from maybe another region or something. So having your own locally built one is ideal. We are not saying that you should build it from the scratch. The FCT for West Africa is a good basis for you to start from there. Take what you need and use it for what you want. That is the simple answer I can give to you. Because I don't know if you have ever seen the FCT before. It's so huge. So I would make it will be more comfortable for me if I'm only focusing on some foods. For example, I'm working in Hohoi. There are certain foods that are unique to Hohoi. So why do I want to worry myself about maybe a food that they are so used to eating in the north? It doesn't really pertain to me. I want to brighten the corner where I am. I want to be more confident to give people more good advice based on dietary advice, based on what is available in my community. So that is why I will focus on building my own from the FCT, the West Africa FCT. Okay. So those are the response to those questions. Maybe I think there are a few more chats. So let's see.
Okay, thank you very much, Doc. Someone is asking if they can get the slides again. Yeah, I'm sure Gand will be able to do that. Once you register on the attendance form, your details would be there, and then the slides can be circulated, or the recordings when it's ready. Okay, so I can't see any more questions in the chat. However, if there's anybody who has any question, please, you can unmute and then ask the question.
Hello.
Yes, please, do go ahead.
Yeah, good evening. Thanks so much for the presentation, Doc. But some of us, we are not able to get the forms you say we should fill. Please, if you can send it on the chat box, so that we fill it, yeah.
All right, so I'm doing that now, so you can. All right, thank you. Yes, any other question? I have just shared the attendance form, so please just fill it. So are we all very convinced? We understand everything? I mean, there's a saying that silence means consent. That means Doc has done a great work. He has made us understand how we can use the West African food composition table to be able to develop our own food composition table based on your local settings. Please, yes. Oh, it's not a question. All right. So if there isn't any question and there aren't any calls for clarification, I would want to thank Doctor very much.
Yeah, just before that, can I just say something a little bit? Hello?
Yeah.
Yes, okay, thank you very much. So I just want to
Yes, Doc, please.
emphasize.
Please
Okay,
go
thank
ahead,
you.
Doc.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that oh, okay, yeah. So I think there's a question on the food atlas. Yeah, so this year, one of my students is also doing a food atlas. Which is mostly using information from the food composition table to develop like a food atlas. But then mostly the food atlas is looking at all the various foods that the people are consuming, but it's more complex. And then that is where the Franny is coming in to really use the food atlas to be able to help estimate the various portion sizes that people are eating. And then once you get these portion sizes that are being eaten, then that is when you now apply information from the food-based dietary guidelines to be from the FCT to be able to do that. Yeah, so there are some kind of promises there as well, but it's just that the food atlas development is really more about estimating or helping with estimating the quantities as well. And then once you have done those estimations, then now you can now use the FCT to be able to determine the nutrients that are coming from the foods as well. And if you see from my presentation, I didn't really talk about the dietary assessment at all, because mostly you will need the data from the dietary assessment to be able to even determine the nutrient content in the food. But that is also another topic for another day. So mostly we are looking at how do you use the composition table after you have got your diet information, and then after you have used your food atlas to be able to estimate the quantities. That is when you now be able to use the food FCT to be able to now do the nutrient intake. So what I wanted to say is that it is important for you to know that dietary data is very difficult to work with, so most people shy away from that. And I must say that you would need to do a little bit of practice for you to get there. So if you are really interested in working with that, you can really get in touch with Gand, and then we can put you in touch with some of the teams that we are working with. Some of the students that we have trained over the years are also developing interest in this, and then they can help you to be able to set up your own FCT. And that is what we really want everybody to be able to do. And then you can now build on that to be able to estimate nutrient intake in your population, and then do some other like fancy stuff. So that is what I would just encourage you, that if you're having difficulty, please reach out, and then we'll link you with some other students, or maybe myself or something, and then we can be able to do this as well. So that is all I just want to add to that. It takes time, but then it's doable. Thank you very much, and I hope that we'll be able to see more usefulness for the FCT.
Okay, Doc. So I saw a last one just before we close. It's asking how is standardizing recipes in this project being done?
Yeah, so standardizing the recipes is really something that you have to, there are a couple of ways by which you have to do that. So for example, you have to determine how you are going to standardize your recipes. So, and that is one project that I also started working on with, there is another group called, I'm blanking out on their name now. So it's called My Health Corp, yes. So My Health Corp is actually like also, they are really coming up with these, trying to help people to eat well as well. So in terms of standardizing recipes, that is something that is a project that has to be taken up. So what we did actually in Ethiopia is that we are observing people cook their own food at home, and then we're trying to use that to be able to build standardized recipes. So for example, the way somebody is preparing her jollof rice may be different from the way somebody is preparing her jollof rice. Even lye soup, we have different shades of lye soup. So trying to collect data from a few women and then that can help you to be able to standardize it. So that is one way if you want to look at it from the population level. But then in clinical practice, you can really do an individualized meal preparation or recipe. And then based on whatever the person has eaten, then you now be able to do a recipe calculation for that person. But then in terms of the population level, then what you want to do is that you want to observe a few women cook the food or that particular recipe, and then you sample from that recipe, and then now that can give you, like, you can use that to develop your standard. So it's not like, it's kind of, it's a process, right? So you want to make sure that you want to invest some effort into that if you are really thinking about standardized recipes. And there was a current work we did with Food FAO as well, looking at standardizing the school meals program in Ghana, the Ghana School Feeding Program. And one of the challenges that we had was trying to look like a standardized recipe we didn't have. So because of that, there are issues with analyzing the dietary data, and I'm sure Dr. Otu and then the team back there are still trying to wrap their head around that. But it's kind of standardized recipes are not available. So what I have been doing in the past is to create a standardized recipe or a cookbook that has all the ingredients and everything inside. But I was being contracted by the My Health Corp to do that. We haven't really cooked the foods ourselves to be able to standardize them. So these are just based on theory and then based on experience and speaking to people. So we need to really cook the foods and then compare a few with a few other people and see how they are cooking those specific recipes before we can be able to come up with a standardized recipe for that. Yeah. So Percy, I don't know if that answers your question. Okay, so I see 3 more messages. Okay.
Okay, so there was one, but it looks like I have lost it. It
Oh,
was
really?
yeah. The person was trying to find out what your take is on the, right, that please, what is your take on the nutrient analysis template from the USDA?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, so I think, I mean, definitely, the truth is that most people are borrowing things from USD. So for me, I think that is like, you can decide to use that. But then, so when I told you, when I was working in University of Ghana, when my Professor Steiner bought the software, I have to adapt it. So there were some foods that were in the software that were not locally based. So I have to go into the system, create different foods, import our own food composition table into the Isha F Pro. So that is what we did. We're also doing a study by the Gates Foundation looking at effects of soy milk consumption on Burkina. We have to estimate their diet intake. The same methods are what we did. We built our own local FCT, and then we imported it into the software, because definitely the software does not know Ghana foods. It will not have Banku in there. So even if you are using the nutrient analysis template from the USDA, which is fine, you don't have to build everything from the scratch, right? So you can use your formulas and everything, but then you want to make sure that your local foods are inputted into the template. And then you can use those prediction equations to be able to now do your predictions as well. So definitely you want to borrow, but then the rule about borrowing, don't just copy and paste, copy and edit. So that is key. So you want to make sure you are doing that. So if you use ChatGPT to do anything for you, copy it, edit it. Don't just go and paste it there, because I know most of you are using it for your assignment now, and it brings you garbage, which is good, but then you want to really make sure that you are copying, editing, and then making it to suit your own local situation. So that is the answer I'll give to you on that. Thank you.
Okay. So on the note of copy, paste, and edit, I think Prof has really enlightened us a lot this evening. And Doc, I would want to thank you very much for the time you have made to come pass by and then deliver this lecture. I mean, though I was not stable, the bits that I was able to follow through, I realized that it is a very valuable tool, the food composition table, that every dietitian and nutritionist practicing in Ghana and across Africa can make very good use of, to be able for us to make some impact and get our indicators, I mean, getting better by the years. For your time. And I know that certainly this is not the last. We will definitely be coming back to you for more. And also I would like to thank all our members who made time to join today's session. We were well over 100, close to 120. I mean, we are very grateful. Please do ensure that you have filled the registration form. I'm putting it back on the chat for the last time so that you can have it filled and submitted. So on this note, Doc,
I think
Prof,
there's a hand
we are
up
very
by
grateful. Thank
Rosie.
you.
I don't know if there's a hand up by Rosie. Rosie, do you have some pressing issue?
I'm not sure.
Hello.
Okay.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Hi, Dr. Isaac. Thank you so much for this in-depth presentation. It was fantastic. And I think it's going to take a long time to actually reflect on what you're saying because a lot of new information. I wanted to find out, in determining your food composition table, did you take samples from different geographical locations? And if you did you find variation in the same type of staples? For example, yam or rice?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Rosie, for your question. So you know what? We don't have to reinvent the wheel, okay? So that is all I'll just tell you. So I wouldn't go around collecting all those information. It's already available in the food composition table. So that is why that's why the Madam mentioned that Madam Danso mentioned that you need to copy, paste, and edit. So that is all we're doing. So we were not generating the foods from the scratch. It's already available. So when you look at the FCT also, there is a lot of variation. So it's look at yam, whether it is fried, it is boiled, it is cooked, it even has variety. So if you saw the presentation, I mentioned about the scientific name. So if it is maybe Dioscorea retundata, Dioscorea alata, all the different scientific name for the yam. We have water yam, we have cocoa yam, we have like sweet yam, all the different types. There are those that are there. It gives you information on where they were collected and everything. I don't have money and I don't have the time to go around and collect all that information. So all we're doing is to borrow. So borrow, and when you borrow, you adjust for the moisture content, you adjust for the nutrients. That is all we're doing. So it's just more of trying to edit whatever is available and trying to make it suit our local context as well. So I hope that answers your question. And I also want to thank Gand very much for giving me this opportunity. I know that the FCT is really difficult and most people don't use it much, or you don't see a lot of publications in that area because of it takes time to build it and then you have to standardize a lot of things. So I'm very happy how they fished me and then allowed me to do this presentation. I want to thank the executives for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Doc. We will fish you more. Don't worry. Okay. Right. So thank you all for your time this evening. We'll take a closing prayer and I would volunteer to do that. So for all, you would grant us the understanding to be able to reflect deeply on the information that we have received, and also to be able to utilize it to benefit ourselves, our clients, and our communities that we serve. We thank you for the life of Doctor. We ask that you continue to grant him increased knowledge in all things that he is doing. Favor him and protect him and his family. We thank you. We bless you. In Jesus' name we have prayed. Amen. Thank you all. Enjoy your evening. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. And sorry I have to be in your homes this evening, but I hope it was worth it. So thank you.